Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. Thank you for joining us for the fifth in our Economy and Me sessions. Due to the interest in these webinars, we are actually continuing at the same time each week with new topics in May and June, and hope you'll find these just as interesting and relevant to you as the ones that we've held in April. One more thing that I want to share with you is that we are pleased that Tom Smith, our faculty guide over the last 4 weeks, has agreed to come back each month to give us all an update on what's going on behind the headlines and how this economic crisis affects us all and answer our questions. So please continue to join us for Business Over Breakfast on Thursdays at 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Our faculty guide for the Economy and Me webinars is Tom Smith. And for those who have joined us before, you know that Tom is an expert in the areas of labor economics, pricing, sports economics and financing, and the economics of entertainment industry and healthcare. Tom's going to kick off this webinar with his observations about what has been happening in the economy and what this means for individuals, and followed by your questions. So please write your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and our team will do their best to get to as many of those questions today as we can. We're posting some of the additional answers on the Emory Executive Education LinkedIn page, so please look for and follow that. And at the end of today's session, there will be a short question survey asking for your thoughts on the event this morning. And so we really hope that you will fill that in, and that will help us improve what we bring to you all. So please enjoy the morning with Tom. It looks like all of the flowers behind him are blossoming.
Yeah.
I look forward to continuing the conversation each Thursday morning. Thanks, Tom.
Oh, thank you, Dean. It's yeah, I just couldn't be, even though it's chilly outside, I couldn't be inside anymore. It's just even with the rain and everything, it's just I got to get outside. Even so, economists in hoodies might be trending today on Twitter. We'll see. All right. Well, so we're going to kick it off the same way we have every week, with about 20 to 25 minutes of observations, things that I'm seeing going on. Again, I would like to thank, as in the past, a lot of people have reached out. People have sent some ideas about things to read, some notes, specific questions about industries. And I really appreciate that people are so interested in learning and wanting to know about how these things impact their industries, what they can anticipate, how they're going to forecast things. I mean, clearly I can't get to all the questions and I can't read everything, but I really do appreciate that people are reaching out and interested about how these things affect their industries. So I'm going to share this, hopefully. Okay. So this is what's going on here. This just came out about 30 minutes ago, the new initial unemployment claims. I'm just showing you the last couple. We've had 6 million, 9 million, and 3 million. And so last week was 4.427 million. And then just reported was another 3.89 million. So the last 5 weeks, we've got somewhere around 30 million people who've filed for unemployment claims. This is a lot, all right, for reference, right? So I mentioned this last week, 2.1 million people were unemployed in the 2001 dot-com, Enron, WorldCom, 9/11 recession, okay? 8.3 million people were unemployed during the Great Recession, right, in 2008 and 2009. So we're talking about it's insane. 15 times the number of people who were unemployed during the 2001 recession, and between 3 and 4 times the number of people who were unemployed during the Great Recession. My dean mentioned just a little while ago when we were looking at this, she says, geez, I mean, that's more than the population of all of Australia. And we looked it up, and so right now the population of Australia is trending right around 25 million people. So the number of people who have filed initial unemployment claims the last 5 weeks is the total of everybody living in Australia. That's quite a bit. My forecasts are that we're going to see somewhere between 20 and 35% unemployment the next 2 months. I know there's some economists who are saying it's going to be, 16 and a half, 17%. I think that's actually a low number. We saw those kind of unemployments right after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and we've had 5 times the number of people just in that state report unemployment claims. And so I think we're going to be trending towards 20 to 35% unemployment really quickly. So there's been a couple of stimulus packages, and the idea of one of the stimulus packages, the payroll protection plan, has been to give companies small business loans that were about 2.5 times what their payroll amount was, and they could use it for payroll, utility, and if they used it for payroll and utility, then upwards of 25% of that loan would be forgiven. But you'd have to show that you actually used it for payroll. And I guess one of the ideas behind that was that was going to then stop these unemployment claims from happening so people could go back to work. Well, that's the problem with that, is that the money has not been allocated very quickly. Still, lots of companies have received funding. That's very, very good. I'm very, very happy for those companies. A lot of companies have not received funding, and you're seeing some bad actors, right? It looks like the Lakers got a big chunk of money. Other companies are receiving funds that probably shouldn't have been receiving funds. It's kind of a mess, because you get people who just sort of say, okay, well, if I'm eligible, I should apply, even though they might not actually be the target audience for a plan like this. And so some companies have been left in the dark. Now, there was a second round of fiscal stimulus that was passed by the Senate and the House last week, and then those loans are going to be rolling out. But still, there's been a lot of delay. Initially, the Treasury said that there was going to be about 10 days between when you were approved and when you had to get funded. But then just this week, they said, we're pretty much throwing those 10 days out the window. It could be 15 days, it could be 20 days, and we're going to try to get you your money as quickly as possible, but there's no guarantees. As a result, people are still filing unemployment claims, even though that was supposed to be a stopgap measure. So here's a heat map of where the unemployment claims are. I talked to a reporter from New York this week, and they were asking about this. They saw this statistic that Georgia is ranking 3rd in the percentage change in unemployment claims since January, and indeed it is, behind New Hampshire, Louisiana. There it is. There's Georgia. Increase in unemployment claims since January, up 4,800%. That's a lot. Okay, so initially I had seen some articles, and some people had asked, is Georgia's economy constructed in such a way that it was immune from a lot of this economic crisis? And it appears not. I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that Georgia had done pretty well, and so when your unemployment is already really, really low, any increase in unemployment is, your base is so low, so smaller base, you're going to have a larger number. So the percentage change since January is going to be pretty high because our unemployment was low, but we're seeing a huge number of people who are becoming unemployed in the service industry, in the airline industry. We've got, Delta is one of our major employers here. So Intercontinental Hotel Group, people are becoming unemployed. I don't like to see this number here. Everybody was sort of saying Georgia was going to be insulated, Atlanta's going to be insulated. Appears not. Okay, so this is a heat map of initial unemployment claims. You can see that Georgia's coming in pretty hot here. All right, and so we've got Florida, which is big, California's big, Texas, of course, up here in New York. This is where the cases are. Again, the heat map is still, this is for, I just grabbed the numbers from yesterday. Still, New York is the hotbed of this, but Georgia's numbers are getting higher. We've got Illinois, Michigan, the Midwest here, right? California is still very strong. Texas, Louisiana are still very strong. Georgia is trending towards the hotter states rather than the lower states. Georgia is currently ranked 12th in terms of the number of cases. So that's why it's slightly hotter than these other states here in the Midwest and in our sort of the heartland here. This is the number of deaths by state. Again, New York is leading this. This is also from as of yesterday. New York is leading here, a high number of deaths. I mean, Georgia is much lighter with respect to the number of deaths. It's still trending somewhere between 12 and 15 on the list. And then here is the number of tests per million population. Okay, so here's where, let's say, Georgia is not as high as we would like it to see. So Georgia is actually tending towards the middle of the pack, like 25th or 27th, depending on the day. So this is the number of tests per million population, right? So you've got, I mean, New York is lots of tests per million population. Louisiana, right? We got some states out here, but it's Georgia is not as high as I would like to have. So we've got more cases, more deaths, not as many tests. Okay, what does this have to do with the economy? You might ask. Well, last week the governor said, okay, we're gonna relax some of the openings, and we're gonna relax some standards. We're gonna allow some different firms to open up, hair salons, barbershops, tattoo parlors, spas, but also some movie theaters and bowling alleys and what have you. So we're relaxing some social distancing standards, gyms, and we're going to let people kind of go back to work and open some places up. And I mentioned last week that the president seemed to be on board with that, and then doesn't seem to be on board with that. And a lot of people are looking at Georgia as let's say, a test case, as the petri dish for whether or not they're going to be successful. Given the fact that Georgia has a high number of cases, so 12th in the country, 11th to 12th in the country, but relatively lower on the ranking with respect to the number of tests, I don't think this is a good combination for the likelihood of success of the governor's policy. So I'm very fearful that we're going to have sort of a relapse in the number of cases. The number of cases is going to spike up in the next 2 weeks, and then people are going to have to reevaluate it. All right. I do know that I've talked to a bunch of small business owners who could have opened up, some people who own gyms, and they said, look, even though the governor said we could open up, I still don't feel like it's completely safe for me to do so. I talked to one of my contacts in the movie industry, and they had a little bit different take on this. And that is that the movie industry can't really open up because there's no product to offer. So most of the studios are offering direct to digital or direct to pay-per-view, and studios are finding it to be relatively profitable. So they're changing their distribution channel. I know a couple of weeks ago, and this may sound like I'm sort of banging the same drum, I fully anticipate that when we open up, we're going to see a different cadre of companies that are available to us as consumers. So what we saw 2 months ago as consumers is not going to be what we're seeing 2 months from now. I fully anticipate that a lot of movie theaters are going to go out of business. The movie theaters are changing their distribution channels and changing how it is that they're releasing films. The theaters are trying to fight back. And so AMC just reported yesterday that they wouldn't show any more Universal movies because of the direct to pay-per-view release of the new Trolls movie. And so they're going to get into a fight, and the studios are going to win that fight. They're going to say, forget about it. The Academy Awards have changed the way that they're going to offer their awards. So movies are still eligible to receive awards if they're direct to DVD release or direct to pay-per-view release, even if they don't have any kind of theater presence at all, which is going to then cut out the necessity to have movie theaters. If you don't have a product and consumers are fearful, then that industry is going to wither away. It is very fearful because I've got some good colleagues and friends who operate in that space. But I think that movie theaters are going to could be significantly diminished, and it might look completely different than what they did like a month ago. Okay. We got some other issues here. Let me scroll this down. what I'm calling meat, and more meat. Okay, so you may be aware that lots of meat processing plants are closing down. Tyson, Cargill, Smithfield, they're closing down because they've had a lot of cases in the meat facilities, right? So the meat facilities, people are packed in there, they're very close, and you're getting lots of cases and quite a few deaths that are coming out of those companies and out of their production facilities. And so they're shutting down. Donald Trump ordered, with his executive power, the meat processing plants. He ordered them to open up and stay open because a disruption in this area would critically impact the infrastructure of the United States, namely food. So if they're not open, then we're not going to get our food. Here's the problem with that, is that not only did he order them to stay open, he also suggested that he would, or somehow there would be legislation that would shield meatpacking companies or other processing plants from legal liabilities going forward. He didn't spell out any specifics, but he's mentioned this a couple times. This is very problematic from an economic standpoint. There is quite a bit of research to suggest that employer liability is strongly associated with higher workplace safety and lower workplace injury. Okay, so when firms are held liable for the safety of their workers, namely through torts and other kinds of legal processes, then firms tend to engage in more workplace safety measures, and workers are safer, fewer injuries. When you relax those liability constraints, then what happens is employers engage in more risky processes, and employees get hurt, like injured, death, what have you. And there's a very strong relationship between these. Like research after research after research shows that these are strongly correlated. Okay, and I just looked through a couple things this morning, and I found hundreds of articles, and this one talks about tort reform and the context of employee safety. And they're just looking at railroads and said, look, I mean, railroads knew how dangerous it was to work in the railroads, and it wasn't until they had liability when they started to engage in safer practices. And you can see that across coal mines and other types of blue collar workers the last 60 years. So if the president or Congress or Senate somehow passes legislation that would protect these meat packing plants from liability, sure enough, those workers will be put in harm's way. You say, well, what does this have to do with economics? Well, we have seen over and over again that when workers feel less safe, there is much lower productivity. So the amount of effort that workers put in a situation where they feel like they're at danger is significantly lower than the effort and the productivity of workers in a safer workplace. And so we can't afford to have lower productivity in an economy that's already suffering from an economic recession. Lower productivity isn't going to get us out of the recession. We need the highest productivity possible. So we need people to be working. We need to be putting in the effort. You don't need people to say, okay, I'm going to show up to work and put in 40% of the effort or 50% of the effort, right? Not to name the fact that by removing eligible workers from the workforce because they've been injured is detrimental to our GDP as well. I mean, there's nothing good about an economy where you don't protect your workers. Lower productivity, right? Fewer workers, it's going to be a lower GDP overall. And we've seen that over and over again. So this is concerning. We should be aware of this. Okay, I did speak to somebody who's a couple people actually who are in this industry. One person who works for pork, and another person who works in the poultry industry. And I would advise you to go buy some fresh chicken. If you like fresh chicken, go buy it this week because you're not likely to see it in the weeks ahead. So there is a significant decline in demand from the restaurant industries. Even though some of these restaurants are still open, there's a huge number of restaurants who are now closed. as a result of this, there's a decrease in demand for processing plants for the farmers. So this is translated into fewer orders from processing plants to farmers. So farmers are now actually euthanizing their flocks, their animals. They're killing their animals because there's no demand for them. It's the marginal cost of feeding and keeping the animals is higher than the marginal benefit of potentially using them for food in the future. So they're killing their animals. They're euthanizing their animals. What's going to happen is that the supply chain is now interrupted and disrupted. So once the farmers start euthanizing their animals, then in 2, 3, 6 months from now, you're just not going to have that product in place to be processed on the shelves. So this goes back to now. As soon as the farmers start doing this, we're going to see a decrease in supply in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. If you like your fresh chicken, you're not going to see it on the shelves. That is, I think, a real reality that we have to face. Even if the administration forces these companies to open up, they probably are not going to have the product to actually process, and they might not have the workers to actually process the product. So just because you say you have to open up doesn't mean that workers are forced to come to work. You can't force somebody to go into an environment that they don't feel is safe. So even though a lot of these people rely on this paycheck and wouldn't get unemployment insurance, if you force them to go, that doesn't mean that they're going to show up. I think there's going to be a huge supply shock to the fresh meat industry. I heard the same kind of things coming from one of the major pork producers in the country, and they said, watch out. Pigs are being destroyed. Pigs are being euthanized. We're not going to have product. Go get your fresh bacon now because you're not going to see it. People don't like frozen meat. We don't actually buy frozen meat. So you want fresh stuff? Go buy it now because you're not going to see it in a month or 2 months. So that's coming from 2 different industry experts. The last thing I will talk about here is some deflationary trends that we've seen that are very, very scary. So here's a month-over-month change in CPI. You see this big downward shift right here. That's deflation. We don't like deflation, okay? Here, this is the crude oil prices. This is West Texas Intermediate oil prices. So a week ago, there was a negative price for the futures market. Now it's up to like $12. Again, this is a huge downward pressure in prices, okay? You might say, well, we shouldn't be concerned about downward pressure in prices. We shouldn't be concerned about deflation because our dollars each have more buying power. That's just not true. What happens when there's a deflationary trend is that people start putting off consumption for future periods. And they say, I am willing to hold on to my money because my money will buy me more going forward. So in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I can get more for my money. Well, then that delay in expenditure actually pushes us farther into an economic recession and pushes prices down even further, which then delays future spending. What we need is let's say, a fire underneath people so that they feel compelled to spend the money that they're receiving. I know that people are getting checks. I know that the fiscal stimulus is now in people's bank accounts and in their pockets. But if they're not spending it, it doesn't have the economic impact that we'd like, okay? So people don't have lots of places to spend it. You can buy some stuff on Amazon. You can buy some stuff at Academy Sports. If you want to, go to Home Depot and, get some lumber, go build a fence. But people aren't going to the local shop. They're not going to, they're not going up to the mountains to do antiquing. They're not going out and spending the money in local communities. And so the fiscal stimulus doesn't have the same kind of traction that we would have seen in previous years. That's like 25 minutes of some initial observations. I'm very happy to take questions about what people are seeing or what they think is going to happen.
Thank you, Tom. Great information. First question this morning. As more states start opening up, for better or worse, do you think we'll start seeing lower unemployment numbers?
Lower. We'll start seeing lower unemployment numbers. Yeah, probably we will. I think there's a combination. So states opening up, stores feel that they can open up their businesses. I don't think every store is going to open up just because they're allowed to, and we're seeing that even in Georgia. Not every gym is opened up. Not every store feels that it's safe. Not every barbershop is clipping hair. But yeah, we'll definitely see lower unemployment numbers. But so let's suppose that we're going into, let's say, 20% unemployment or 26% unemployment. So then it goes from 26 down to 18. That's still awful. I mean, it'll be better, but it's still really bad, like worse than anything we've seen in 80 years. Yeah, unemployment will start to tick down, but it will be so high that the pace that it's ticking down will be sort of negligible. That's my forecast. So
Thanks, Tom. What's the estimate of total unemployed if you count those who are not in the job market? And second part of that question, there's a lot of debate regarding current federal unemployment assistance hampering businesses being able to rehire due to better federal benefits.
yeah.
What's your take on that?
Let me tackle the second one here first. I wasn't sure what the first part of that is. So let me get to this one. There is some concern that so it's part of, there have been three sort of stimulus packages plus another half. So there's sort of 3.5 fiscal stimulus rounds that we have encountered. And one of the earlier rounds changed the way that unemployment insurance was delivered and also changed the nature of the unemployment itself, so that people were receiving an additional $600 on top of what they would already be receiving. And so some employers have identified that when given a choice, can you come back to work? Some people are saying, well, you know what, if I just stay out of work, I'll actually receive more money than if I went back. So some people are being disincentivized to work because their option, receiving unemployment, they will actually get higher pay. And the person is aware of that. They've read a little bit about this. I don't think it is the majority of people, but it's certainly widespread enough, or it's happened enough to give people some pause with respect to the efficiency of that program. So you don't want to disincentivize people to work. And this is people's number one complaint against unemployment insurance in the first place, is that you give people a safety net and then they get lazy and they sit around. Okay. That's not the majority of people, but certainly you have bad actors in the economy. And some people say, well, I'll just take advantage of this. I think it's problematic, and we have to try to figure out how to incentivize people to actually go back to work. The initial idea of putting more money in people's pockets, the $600 for unemployed, would create economic churn and get, let's say, businesses back going again. But if you have no place to spend that, then there's no economic traction. So I think that both the Congress and the Senate have to reevaluate and change that incentive structure a little bit to say, okay, well, instead of having this unemployment insurance last, let's say, maybe 8 or 12 weeks, then maybe you'll shorten the span, which will then incentivize some people to go back to work. Now, of course, we don't want to incentivize people to go back into work if it's dangerous. And so there's a very, very fine balancing act. But I would like to see the Senate and the Congress go back and evaluate, let's say, the time frame under which they can receive that additional $600 to try to cure any of the, let's say, incentive structures for people saying, well, I don't have to work because I'm going to get more money. Christine, what was the first part of that question?
Yes, thanks, Tom. Do you know what the estimate is of total unemployment if you count those who aren't in the job market?
Yeah, it's almost so this person is probably aware that you've got different types of unemployment. So there's U3 and U6, marginally employed versus not marginally employed. If people have left the labor market because they're discouraged, then they're generally not counted as unemployed. So the new unemployment numbers are going to come out next week. And that is going to be reflective of what's going on in all of April. And then you can look at U3 versus U9. U3 is sort of the typical unemployment, and then U6 and U9 look at discouraged workers or also sort of marginally placed workers. I would anticipate that the unemployment rate is going to be somewhere between, let's say, 20 and 30%. If you count the number of people who are discouraged, it might increase that by another 5%, maybe 35%.
Thank you, Tom.
Yep.
Yes. The next question asks, how do you reconcile the stock market taking off given the current economic conditions?
You know, I heard Steve Eisman talk with Dr. Jeff Rosenzweig. He's one of our professors, and he's a good friend, a good colleague. And he invited Steve Eisman to talk. Steve is one of the main characters in The Big Short, and I agree with his perception. And I've been talking about this with some people in the financial industries. The bond market is just a complete wasteland. People are fearful that that companies aren't going to make their coupon payments. The companies aren't going to make the payments that they say that they're going to make. As a result, people are fleeing the bond markets. Okay, government securities are have their yields are like a 0.2%, 0.3%. I mean, they're very, very, very low yields for 10-year government securities. That's usually where people go for safety, but the yields are practically zero. I mean, you're not going to get any kind of return. Real estate is very, very risky. And so the only thing left is the equities market. And so if you don't have a working bond market, if you don't have real estate, if the government securities have just about a zero yield, then all you're left with is equities. And so people are looking for something that they can grab onto, and what they're grabbing onto is news that's not as bad as it could be. So I mean, Ford upticked a little bit this week on news that they didn't lose as much money as everybody anticipated that they would. So, and Ford's saying things like, well, we're not going to start some new ventures. Okay, so you're not going to expend capital, right? Disney ticked up a little bit, and so they've furloughed, 50,000, 60,000 workers, and as a result, their stock ticked up. And you said that just doesn't make any sense. Well, you're saying, okay, well, they furloughed everybody, so they're cutting their costs. They have some movies that are coming out. They have their industry isn't just theme parks, it's all types of entertainment. So if they're cutting all their theme park workers, their expenses are going to go down. They release some movies, they've got revenue without expenses. This might actually improve their balance sheet and might actually improve their P&L statement. So their stock is increasing. I have read a number of analysts who suggest that after this thing settles and the bond market starts to solidify, that stocks are going to tank again. People are going to escape companies and stocks that really are underperforming. Maybe they start going back to looking at like pure valuation. But I think that it's the only market that seems to be working, and so it's drawing everybody's attention. As a result, you're seeing some stocks starting to take off again.
Tom, could you share your thoughts about the impact of potential strike as Amazon, Walmart, and other profit centers talk about striking May 1st?
Oh, so their workers are talking about striking. Yeah, so people aren't feeling safe. People don't feel like that the firms are taking care of them or listening to what their needs are, providing them with masks. I mean, you've got nurses, doctors, other people who are working on the front line who don't have personal protective gear. They don't have their masks. So and Amazon may or may not be providing these, right? Your Tysons, your Cargills, other kind of meat processing plants. So people feel that they're being put in a situation where their health is at risk. And so they're striking to say, give me PPE, give me some kind of compensating wage differential is what it's called, right? You compensate me for being more risky or taking on a more risky job. So if that happens, our economy is already under such immense pressure. There's a couple sectors that seem to be hanging on, and if those sectors fall apart, then our supply chains will be disrupted and could be disrupted for months at a time, right? I mean, it's the only thing that's working right now, perhaps, is being able to order your stuff on Amazon or order it from other fulfillment centers. And if those things go down, then what are you going to be left doing? Like, you're not going to be able to spend money on anything. Then the fiscal stimulus has even less traction. So workers strike because they're not feeling like they're taken care of. That's their right. And that's going to disrupt supply chains immensely. It's going to cause even more downward pressure in GDP. So it's bad news. I mean, firms should be taking care of their workers for sure, because we can't afford to have these additional disruptions.
Thank you, Tom. What are your thoughts about this new antiviral medicine, the remdesivir, and how the FDA may grant emergency use authorization? Even if successful, how long do you see it taking us getting back to normal?
I don't know. I saw, I read an article about Dr. Fauci talking about this, and he said it had some very, very promising results. They were going to do some more testing. This morning I heard him talking on MSNBC or CNN that, I mean, even if the results aren't 100%, it shows that there's proof of concept, is what he called it. And I think that every time you have sort of a proof of concept, it tells you that the researchers working on this have some ideas and they know how to attack something or fix it or come up with a preventative or what have you. You know, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a a hard scientist in terms of chemistry or biology. So I don't know how those things roll out. What I do know is that our economy is not really going to get back together until people feel safe and engage in and say, okay, I can go out and engage in the kind of activities that I did before. I talked about this a little bit last week, that a V-shaped recovery. So in the early 80s, 82, we had a recession, and the unemployment actually looked like a V. So it went up and came back down, and it was a V shape, right? Different than the 91, 2001, and clearly much different than the 2008 recession. So if we're looking at that and we're saying, that's the kind of recovery we want, it still took a full 3 years to get back to the unemployment level that we did prior to that economic recession. And so even though it was a V shape, the going from the bottom to the top, back to the bottom, that span was 3 years. So the recession lasted, 14 months, 15 months, but the full recovery so that people say, oh, we're back to where we were prior, is 3 years. So if we get in a V shape, this thing goes all the way up to 30%. I mean, it might be 3 years. If it's quick, it might be 3 years before we get back down to, let's say, 5.5% unemployment. It's not going to be a flip of a switch because so many firms are going to burn through their capital. Banks aren't going to be lending firms additional loans. I mean, they've got capital constraints of their own. And so even if we get a very, let's say, a robust fix, cure, preventative pharmaceutical in place in, let's say, 6 months, the economy's still going to take a long time to get back on track. I mean, it's been disrupted so much. So I'm hopeful that there's a cure. I am less optimistic that the cure will lead to an immediate recovery. So we'll go from, let's say, 25% unemployment back down to 5% unemployment. I don't think that's going to happen. If it starts ticking down, it'll go from 25 back down to 20, and then it'll go down from there, 2018, 17, 16, 15, over the next 2 years. And we could have 2 years of double-digit unemployment. I hope that's not the case, but historically, we've seen these spikes, and the spikes, even when they come down, it takes 2 years for the spike to come back down.
Tom, some interesting data was presented yesterday regarding the drop in healthcare generated revenue, creating an outsized effect in national GDP drop. Is this likely recession being healthcare business driven?
I didn't, you just dropped out for a second. Could you repeat the second half of that question,
Yes.
please?
The data presented yesterday regarding drop in healthcare generated revenue, maybe creating an outsized effect in national GDP drop. Is this likely recession being healthcare business driven?
Yeah, so the recession is so 10 years from now or 20 years from now, we're going to be referring to this as the COVID recession or the COVID depression. And so it'll be driven by disruption as a result of COVID causing people to sequester or quarantine. So then, so and then it will show itself in a number of areas. And though these areas will include a decrease in, let's say, automobile consumption, a decrease in airlines, but most certainly a decrease in how healthcare, the kind of healthcare that is used and the kind of money that's being spent in healthcare. So I've read probably 24 articles that are just talking about the decrease in, let's say, elective surgeries and other types of consumer health spending and how that's impacting the industry. I mean, just think about this. A lot of dentists' offices are closed. And so for, let's say, regular routine maintenance, checkups, things of this nature, like the CDC is recommending that people don't go in for, let's say, regular dental, cleaning or what have you. So that dentists, physicians, family practices, like they're only seeing people on an emergency level. And even then, the emergency level is people are saying, look, this is an emergency, but it's not an emergency. Do I really want to put myself in a situation where I'm around people who are sick with COVID? So people are just changing their consumption patterns significantly in this respect. So there's no doubt there will be a significant decline in healthcare spending. And our economy, part of Atlanta's economy, has to do with healthcare technology. So if we're not spending in healthcare, we're certainly all of the spending that ripples out from that is going to be impacted negatively. So I guess I wouldn't classify it as a healthcare recession. It's going to be a health-driven recession, and all types of industries are going to be impacted. But no doubt, healthcare, physicians, dentists, all going to be in bad shape, I'm afraid to say.
Tom, can you comment on the oil and gas industry and what are your thoughts? What is the percentage of consolidations you see happening?
Oh my goodness, right? So, even though there maybe was an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Russia to stop producing oil, they're still producing oil. So the prices have gone, so there's a huge supply and there's a huge decrease in demand. And so I was talking to my MBA students, this is ECAT 501 or Econ 201, whatever 01 you want to put behind it. So you have an increase in supply and a decrease in demand that's going to push prices down. So we've already seen a number of shale oil companies file for bankruptcy. We're going to see a continued, just a huge decline in the number of shale oil companies that are liquid, that sort of aren't in bankruptcy. So they're just going to continue in bankruptcy. There's no, let's say, easy way to sort of back your way out of and then back your way into the production. As one of my colleagues, Ray Hill was mentioning, is that it's incredibly expensive to sort of turn on and turn off these facilities. And so these facilities will continue to operate even if they're at a loss, as long as they're covering their variable costs, because it's so darn expensive to sort of shut them down and then start them back up. So they'll be bankrupt, they'll be losing money, but they'll still be pumping oil. It's a bad situation. What I'm really fearful of is that if this thing rocks, let's say Texas, the Dakotas, then you have this, even after people get back to work, those parts of the economy are still significantly depressed. I was anticipating that we were going to have sort of a crisis, a farmland crisis, and a sort of a heartland crisis because of our trade war with China, and then with Saudi Arabia and Russia pumping as much oil as they are, it's very possible that we could have had a secondary crisis in, going from Texas up through the middle of our country in these shale oil fields. I still think if we get out of the COVID and people actually becomes safe, that part of the industry will not recover until Saudi Arabia and Russia agree that they're not going to pump as much oil. That's a very, very bad situation. And since oil and energy are a big part of how we spend money, there's going to be a depression, like a downward pressure on prices, and so there's going to be a deflationary trend. Okay, let's talk about. Hold on, I want to mention something else, and that I've been reading about is that, let's say, there are changes in how people are consuming goods and services, and it's not just oil. So I read this lengthy article yesterday about things like craft beer. So craft beer sales are down almost 60%, right? And so your Budweisers and your Miller Lights and whatever else, I mean, their sales are up 40 to 60%. Okay, so some of these things you might think are inferior goods. So your Pabst Blue Ribbons. Anybody who works for Pabst, I apologize in advance of that statement. But here's the deal. We saw this happening in the 2008 recession as well, is that as people lose their income, they tend to go towards alcohol that's less costly, let's say not as high quality. I don't know if we're seeing that same kind of maneuvering, but we are seeing really robust sales in, let's say, domestic beer in the non-craft variety, and a huge decrease in sales for craft variety beers. What does this mean? Oh, we've got all these beautiful breweries around Atlanta. I fully anticipate that half of them will be out of business in the next 2 months. It's a real shame because they're really wonderful establishments and they're usually really good people. And so usually they're always good people. Okay. And I don't want to see these companies go out of business, but people are changing the way they're consuming, and those companies are going to go out of business. It's a shame. And some oil companies are going to go out of business. And so, I mean, we just have to be prepared that this thing is going to be really, really, really bad. And if it's less bad than that, we should be grateful. But we're going to start with the assumption that things are going to be awful and then go from there. Okay.
Tom, can you comment or share your thoughts on Sweden's response to the pandemic versus the rest of the world, and
Wow.
South Dakota versus?
That's a great question, Kristen. Sorry that I interrupted you. It's a great question. I actually read 2 articles about Sweden's response yesterday. I took a picture of this. So it turns out that Sweden has about twice the population of its neighbors. Sweden has been doing this sort of very laissez-faire, quarantine, don't quarantine, it's all chill, do whatever you need to do kind of approach. I know I'm being very, very generic about that, but Sweden has been, let's say, approaching this in a very much more open way than its neighbors. So with twice the population, Sweden has almost 4 times or 5 times the number of cases and about 5 times the number of deaths. So let's say Norway has about 400 deaths and Sweden has over 2,000 deaths. So it does not appear that the approach of don't worry about it, let's just go out and get some kind of community immunity, right? Some herd immunity, and everything is going to be fine, actually helps the country in the short run. So you can check those numbers, right? Sweden is twice the population. They have 4 or 5 times the number of cases and 5 times the number of deaths as their neighbors. It does not appear that by having a very loosey-goosey approach helps your economy or helps your population in any measurable way. I cannot believe that the science is going to go one way and the economics is going to go in a different way. So if you're losing population, if people are getting sicker, it's going to put more of a tax on your resources and your economy is going to suffer. All right. And we've seen the opposite in countries that have really buckled down, right? And so that they're eliminating or minimizing the spread and minimizing the number of new cases, minimizing the number of deaths, their economy is actually ramping back up. There is lots of evidence that is occurring. And so I have seen 0 evidence that a loosey-goosey approach has any kind of either medical or economic benefit. And so it's kind of startling to see how impactful it is. To that effect, when you've seen, even in our country, governors who have, let's say, relaxed some of their initial constraints. So in California, they open up the beaches. Well, the governor's now closing the beaches because people are not engaging in good behavior. There's being bad actors. So they say, fine, I'll walk on the beach. We're not supposed to set up camp, but yeah, screw it. I can set up camp. It's not a big deal. But then everybody is saying, well, it's no big deal. I'm going to do it because I want to do it. Well, then what happens is you don't have enough police to monitor the social distancing restrictions that have been put in place. And so you get this congregation of people, you're going to get more spread, you're going to get more cases, you're going to get more deaths. It's going to impact your economy. So the governor is shutting things down. So he's shutting things down right as Florida and Florida and Georgia are saying, whatever, let's open them back up. I am very fearful that that's going to lead to a spike in cases, which is then going to make people sort of double down on their quarantining, which is then going to impact our ability to grow economically.
Wow, that's mind blowing.
Okay.
Tom,
Yeah.
you know that money movement is key in keeping the economy expanding.
I'm sorry, did you say money movement?
Money movement.
Yeah.
Can you speak to how global economies are going to impact the U.S.?
Oh, this is insane. And so I just think about this. We have very, very robust trade with China and Canada and Mexico. So Canada and Mexico are our two biggest trading partners, and then China. And depending on the sector, it's one of those three is 1, 2, or 3 in different sectors. So we need to have strong trading partners in order to have a strong economy. Okay, we are relying on them buying our products, and our consumers rely on these other countries to provide us products. This is when you go to Walmart, you go to the Target, you're buying goods from other countries, okay? And our components are made in other countries. The fact that other countries are shutting down means that components aren't going to be free flowing. It also means that that our international trade is going to be diminished. So I read maybe a handful of articles, 5 or 6, that talked about how lots of countries now have changed their trading restrictions, or have put trading restrictions in place such that they are hoarding food, flour, grains. So they're saying, we're not going to export any rice. What we're going to do is we're going to keep all the rice for ourselves. Okay. And as a result, then you're changing the nature of the trade between countries. So if a country says, well, you're really good at making rice, we're really good at making cars, you take advantage of what are called comparative advantages, and then you trade. Well, if you're hoarding rice or you're hoarding flour, it doesn't give us an opportunity to trade. We would certainly like you to send rice to us. Well, you're going to go to the store and you're going to see the shelves are empty when it comes to rice. You might be able to go to Costco and buy a 50-pound bag, but you can't go to the Kroger or the Publix and find a 2-pound bag of rice. It's just not there. Why? Because these other countries are hoarding their products. As a result, global supply chains and global trade is being impacted negatively. So I am very fearful that global trade disruption, it takes a long time to get those policies back in place. Okay, so we have to maintain a strong alliance with our trading partners, and we have to engage in trade where we can, knowing that other countries are hoarding their goods because they feel like they have to.
Thanks, Tom. I think this is our last question. Can Georgia afford the increasing percentage of unemployment claims long term?
So, I mean, the way that the Georgia works is that individual employers pay into the system, and then this system, you build a sort of a cache of resources, reserves, and then the unemployment claims go out from there. The additional $600, my understanding is that that's coming from federal dollars. Okay, and so there are federal dollars, and then there are, let's say, employer and state dollars. Okay, and so every state is finding themselves in the red. So tax revenue is going way down and expenses are going way up. There's no state that can afford to continue with the rate of unemployment claims that are coming in. No state. And I know that last week I mentioned that Mitch McConnell had suggested that states just go bankrupt. I mean, they can't go bankrupt. There's just a federal law. There's no federal law in place that allows states to go bankrupt. So the Fed has to step in and provide resources for the states, because the Fed can borrow money at such significantly lower rates than the states can. It just makes good economic sense. That said, none of these states can actually afford the number of people unemployed, the loss of revenue from taxes, and the increased expenditure from, not only providing medical assistance and other types of assistance, but also paying out these unemployment claims. I mean, the revenue expenses have shifted. They've flipped 100%. And so huge expenses and no revenue. No state can afford that going forward, not in the long run.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. Everyone, on behalf of Emory Executive Education, Tom Smith, we definitely want to thank you all for tuning in every Thursday with us for the Business Over Breakfast series topic, The Economy and Me. As Nicola mentioned earlier, the Business Over Breakfast series does continue. We'll have a new topic next Thursday, May 7th at 9 a.m., Agile Alignment with David Norris. So we hope you'll tune in for that. In the chat box, you will notice there is a registration link to register for that particular webinar series. A copy of this recording for today's Economy and Me topic will be available on the Emory Executive Education LinkedIn page. That link is also in the chat box as well. And momentarily, you will notice a brief survey pop up on your screen. We just ask that you all take about 1 to 2 minutes to fill out that survey and give us some feedback on today's webinar. Tom, I will turn it back over to you.
No, it's thank you very much. I appreciate lots of questions, lots of comments, chats. I know people are reaching out to me individually to get feedback on stuff, to provide resources, things that I should be reading. I actually appreciate that. I love the fact that people are so interested in what's going on with the economy. And my goal is to provide you with information as best as I can. And, a lot of people say, okay, I've got good information here. Would you consider looking at this? And absolutely, I read everything that people send me. I really appreciate that that people have interest in this topic, because I am so passionate about this. So I appreciate people reaching out and being as interactive as they are.
Thanks so much, Tom. And also, everyone, just to let you know, Tom's not going anywhere. As Nicola mentioned, he will be returning.
Still in my backyard. Still in my backyard.
He will be returning. So in addition to the May webinar series that you all see on your screen, Tom will be coming back on Thursday, June 4th, same time, 9 a.m. to talk about Economy and Me again. So we thank you all so much for joining us. Hope you'll tune in next Thursday and every Thursday, and we look forward to seeing you all again.